Hi, sorry, I
Go
just
ahead.
want to okay, great. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the OpenRTB 3.0 Demystify webinar. Before we started, I just want to say a big thank you to IAB Tech Lab, Alan Dove from Spotex, and Ian Trider from Centro for hosting today's session. Jennifer from IAB Tech Lab will talk to you in a bit more detail about what this session is going to cover. But essentially, the session was set up because OpenRTB 3.0 is proposing some of the biggest changes to OpenRTB protocol, and the specifications for this are up for public comment until 24th of September. This being said, we know that such specifications are often very technical and complex to navigate through, so we're hoping that this demystified session helps you better understand the changes that are being proposed. I just want to add as well that it's the first time that we're running such a webinar, so it would be really beneficial for us if at the end of the call we could get your feedback, just to hear if it's something that you enjoyed and something that you want us to be doing more of. So if I could just ask that you get in touch with your membership manager after the call with any comments or feedback. I will now pass on to Jennifer from the Tech Lab. Thank you.
Tina, thank you for the warm welcome. My name is Jennifer. I work at Tech Lab. I also have with me today Alan Dove, the CTO at Spotex, and Ian Trider, Director of RTB Platforms Operations at Centro. These two guys are members of the OpenRTB commit group, so they're leaders within the OpenRTB space, and we're really happy that they're here to help demystify. So I'll take us through a few context setting slides so that we understand what we're going to learn today. We're going to learn about the history of OpenRTB. We're going to understand what the context is of what the problems are, of why we need to have major updates to OpenRTB. We're going to understand the problem statements that we're trying to solve for. So marketers and buyers want real transparency and trust in the supply chain. Publishers want more control over user experience, and programmatic players want confidence that ad spend is not being wasted on fraud. We're going to understand how to approach the docs. There's a new structure in place where OpenRTB and AdCom work together, and AdCom is new. So we'll talk about what that means, what the layers of these specifications are, and how to use this stack. We'll talk about feature highlights, and here Alan and Ian will talk through some of the really key updates to OpenRTB, including the use of AdCom. And then we'll talk about the beta period, which ends on September 24th, the public comments end. And we'll talk about kind of what our expected timeline looks like, what adoption might look like, and give you some expectations there. We'll continue throughout the agenda here to talk about how and what. So trying to make these as real world examples as possible, and then we'll save plenty of time for Q&A. The IAB Tech Lab, if you don't know, is a global nonprofit research and development consortium. So we are stewards of technology standards like OpenRTB or the GDPR Transparency and Consent Framework. We also provide software like the Open Measurement SDK or various testers or bidder validators and tools where needed. So that's us. The OpenRTB working group is one of our largest working groups, since OpenRTB as a standard is one of our older standards. There are each company that's a Tech Lab member can have representatives. There's almost 300 or more people who are members of the OpenRTB working group roster. It's quite large. There often are bi-weekly meetings as we finalize the specs. We don't always have bi-weekly, but it's intended to be bi-weekly. And then there's a Slack channel for ongoing discussion. There's a pretty vibrant community around these specifications. OpenRTB in this history was written by Jim Butler, who authors the specification of OpenRTB. The history is recorded thusly. So OpenRTB was launched as a pilot project in November 2010. Then the founding members worked on mobile specification in February 2011, eventually expanding to include video, display, and mobile all in one document. OpenRTB was then established as an IAB standard in 2012, so kind of taking it to this platform. And then in the recent years, we've had a couple of upgrades to OpenRTB. So we've saw most recently version 2.5, and we finally have done kind of an overhaul of the specification. So revamping it to account for a complex supply chain where we see plenty of hops and plenty of players in the programmatic ad exchange space, and so we've gone through this overhaul to be able to better support that complexity. So some of the questions that we want to answer regarding setting the stage here: why do we need major updates to OpenRTB? And also, how does a spec rebuild help us achieve better transparency? So some of the major themes that we're trying to address are security, trust, authenticity, and transparency. And we also wanted to make sure that the specifications were developer friendly. So what that means is we have major features, and I'm kind of foreshadowing to what we'll learn more about, like the ads.cert signed bid requests, which is intended to provide security and also the proof of authenticity of the inventory itself. We have revamped the way that we describe ad creative so that there can be transparency on what that ad creative is, so that publishers can have greater levels of control. Foreshadowing here, we'll dive deeper. And a spec rebuild helps us achieve this better transparency because there are now structures in place that lead into better transparency. We'll talk about what that means. And then I say developer friendly because in part due to the structure of how we've restructured the specifications, and I'll show you about that. And also the field names themselves are shortened or made more payload friendly, so that we can have better efficiency when sending bid requests. So at a high level, we'll talk about the use cases, and when we think about what problems we're solving, marketers and buyers, they want transparency and trust. Publishers want more control over user experience. Programmatic players want confidence that ad spend's not being wasted on fraud. These are things that we hear consistently. There was plenty of market buzz in the trade press recently around ads.txt and making sure that folks were appropriately respecting the ads.txt file contents, so that's the authorized digital sellers. We consistently hear this message of not wanting to waste ad spend on fraudulent dollars. So we continue to hear that. We think about ads.txt in partnership with some of these changes, and we're really excited for delivering responses to these problems with OpenRTB. So breaking down some of the features and how we categorize them with these major goals. When we think about the theme of trust and transparency, we can think about a few of the different features thusly. So advertisers, we want advertisers to know what you're buying. So when we think about the authenticity or the transparency of the inventory, we think about signed bid requests, which is this concept also referred to as ads.cert. We'll talk about specifically how that works in a moment, but that proves the authenticity of the inventory itself. And that goes hand in hand with the continued use of ads.txt, which is that authorized digital sellers list. For publishers, when publishers want predictable creatives, what are a few features that we can give them? Well, we have newly in this iteration, whitelisted JavaScript trackers. So that's a feature that would allow for publishers to kind of declare what they would allow to run on their page. We also have the specification AdCom, which needs to be used hand in hand with OpenRTB, that has support for new media channels, including simple image banner. So for Also, the ad management API specification allows for publishers to have greater control on creative approval processes. So we'll talk about the ad management API as well. Continuing through the themes and the direct features that kind of correlate to these themes. When we think about the theme of trying to be developer friendly, feature updates include new billing notifications model. So we know that reconciliation of billing notifications has not been perhaps as clear as it needed to be, and so we've revamped the way that billing notifications are sent, as well as some of the guidance that corresponds to that. We have also added this new ad management spec that can standardize integrations of creative approval processes, and so that's a new specification that allows for developer-friendly benefits. We also have resource optimized, so shorter names for fields where it makes sense, and binary support as well. And then perhaps most obvious change is this just decoupling of specifications with this layered model. So open media is the phrase that we use to describe this decoupling, where we have a transaction layer specification and a domain layer specification. So open media and how to approach the tech stack. So I think this is one of the areas where, Tina, you kind of hinted that we might be able to provide the most clarity. So I'm excited we can dive through this. So when we look at OpenRTB 3, it's not the same way we look at OpenRTB 2.5 or any previous version. Previously, you would simply go to like iab.com/openrtb and find a PDF with the most recent version. And that's pretty much how all you needed to do to find the specification. But what we've done is kind of separated out each function, and we've created a suite or a stack of specifications that can work together, which provides greater capabilities for dynamic updates in the future, and allows for us to kind of approach each different area separately. So really, we're talking about the same thing. When we talk about OpenRTB, we also now need to talk about AdCom. So OpenRTB 3 and all of the documents that were released earlier this year includes the following. It includes OpenRTB 3.0, and a subsection of that is the ads.cert signed bid request specification. It includes AdCom 1.0, and it includes the ad management API specification. Also expected are transition guidance documentation, mapping resources, and these support documents can come as we move to finalize these specifications. So that would be part of kind of the documentation that you would approach. When we talk about open media, we talk about these different layers. And this diagram should help us understand what those layers are and why and how they work together. So this is taken off of OSI model, where we think about all these different layers to technology. So we're working on HTTP, we're working with JSON binary support, and then we've got the actual programmatic specifications for digital advertising. So this transaction layer, includes all of the specifications of how to transact something. So OpenRTB transacts real-time bids, bid request, bid response. OpenDirect is a way to transact insertion orders or to do order management, but that's still transactional between a buyer and seller, and defines that space. OpenDirect has also gone through an iteration this year as well. ad management API transacts creative for approval, so transactional. All of these specifications can now, due to this major update that we've made, talk about their each kind of different transaction and then talk about what is being transacted in the same way. So this domain layer, we could also think about it as the business objects or the definitions of the objects that are going to be transacted. So that's things like the video, the audio, the display, the native objects. Those are all defined now within this advertising common object model. So that can be shared across all these transactions. So hopefully this visual helps understand why we believe that this way of approaching and kind of rebuilding our programmatic specification stack can be more useful, potentially allowing for better cross functionality across these transactional specs. We've got a column on the far right there of related resources. So ads.txt or various types of bid validators or other web resources are related to this and can be like ads.txt is a web resource. So that would be kind of not necessarily transaction or domain, but still related to programmatic media, so open media specifications. So open media is this framework for the programmatic stack. It incorporates these transactional specifications as well as these domain specification, the AdCom. It is both conceptual and a practical approach. So it allows us to understand what areas need to be standardized, but it also is a way to kind of segment, hey, this kind of, if there's a request to standardize a new type of media, that should probably happen in the AdCom spec, because then it can be applied across all of the different transactional specs. It allows us to scale easier into those new media channels, or to quickly kind of approach a new way of transacting media. And it's also effective because instead of trying to bulk update one big thing over there, as we previously had it structured, now we can compartmentalize and more quickly and more dynamically update where necessary. So we're really excited about this structure moving forward. And I believe that this kind of approach might help you understand better how to approach the documentation itself. So when we think about this open media concept as the way to approach the stack or the suite of specifications, a key thing to take away as well is that whereas previously for OpenRTB 2.5, for example, you could simply have OpenRTB 2.5. Now you'll need to use OpenRTB 3.0, for example, and also AdCom. So you have to, if you're going to transact, you got to be transacting something. So you got to use both of those specifications together. So next on our agenda, Alan Dove from SpotX, you'll talk us through the concept of security and transparency. And I'll go ahead and click your slides through. So just let me know next, and I'll do that for you.
All right. Thanks, Jennifer. Yeah, one of the big focuses of the Tech Lab, certainly over the last year, has been around this concept of inventory assurance and the idea that we want to have both basically an authentication and authorization model available for these OpenRTB transactions. Since 2010, OpenRTB has exploded, and I don't think we've ever done a real analysis of exactly how many ad dollars are transacted this way, but it's got to be in the billions, probably daily. And so, with the advent and the continuing fight against fraud in our space, inventory assurance became even more critical. And so the Tech Lab, as many of you are I'm sure very aware, has really focused on, all right, what can we do to help buyers and sellers really provide security and assurance for this inventory that we're exchanging and selling. Next. Slide's not, there you go. Thank you. So today, we've had a lot of in the space, and certainly I know in video and one of the challenges for buyers is exactly there's so many free text fields that come across in an open RTB transaction. A lot of this is everything from site name and it's all the way down to refer URLs and other types of information about content category, etc. And over time, some of that stuff can get watered down. I mean, even the HTTP spec itself has this concept of refer, which is just a free text field. There's a lot of times where these supply chains, as these fields become either obfuscated or buyers can't necessarily trust that what they're seeing in one of these bid requests to them is actually what the content is or is accurate. And so as part of that, when you look at a typical transaction, it's a fairly complex supply chain, and that includes everything from publisher all the way down to buyer and then back out to actually impressing the ads themselves. So in the past, we as a group in an industry have tried a few things, everything from OpenRTB 2.5 with this payment chain or P chain, the concept of trying to create a chain of custody, if you will, for an impression. Again, it's all lacking a little bit because it has been nothing but free text and free form fields and no way to really make sure that what you as a buyer are seeing in that bid request to you is authentic and accurate. And this is given rise to, there's post-impression validation that goes on because of these things. There's just a lot that happens in our complex ecosystem. Next. So when we began looking at OpenRTB 3.0 as a major overhaul, and really OpenRTB 3.0, the biggest change has been this addition and this separation into layers and the concept of AdCom, which will be amazing for us moving forward. Security and inventory assurance became kind of tantamount to what we wanted to address. And the idea is that we have a way to sign the bid requests by a publisher for advertisers. The information that's in those bid requests, such as domain, IDFA, TIDS, any of that type of critical intel, cannot be altered or modified as that signature will become invalid. Basically, there's any of the signatures and the approach we're taking for ads.cert, it's all via standard mechanisms that are freely available in libraries that have been tried and true and tested over time, everything from the OpenSSL libraries all the way down. There's nothing that the Tech Lab is inventing. We're actually riding on top of industry standard security technologies. And note that in this first one, there's not going to be necessarily the concept of a chain of custody or a chain of signatures right now. We're working on that for future versions. Next. So ads.cert, the general way it works is basically a publisher that is originating a real-time transaction, an RTB transaction, is the first who basically signs this message. And we've defined in ads.cert a number of the fields, the key fields that we expect to see in the signature. And the signature has a specific format of the fields, that we're signing. And the idea is it gives a way for a buyer to really trace back and verify that, that critical data was sent by the publisher themselves. So it gives you a much higher order of trust as a buyer that what you're buying is actually authentic. Ads.txt already gives buyers the ability to say that, yes, this transaction that I'm getting has been authorized by a publisher through a particular vendor or ad server, whatever it might be. Now ads.cert takes it one more step and says, I can guarantee that we're authentic here. Inventory assurance requires both ends. I call it auth 2, that concept of authorization and authentication. And when we released ads.txt, we knew ads.cert had to come immediately after, and it's pretty exciting now that it's finally here, because it gives a real sense to both buy and sell side of pure assurance. They're just these two technologies, and I've heard folks ask the question of, well, wait a minute, how is it different than ads.txt? Do we still need ads.txt? And the answer is yes, they both work in conjunction. It's not enough for someone to look at a signature on an open RTB request and go, yep, that has been unmodified from the source. But how do I, as a buyer, know that that source and where I got this bid request from is allowed to sell for that source? Well, that's what ads.txt is. So they really do work hand in hand. Next. So really, as we're talking about implementation, and we've got some beta work going on right now internally in the a number of companies and the tech lab groups. We're kind of eating our own dog food right now, making sure that this wonderful ads.cert spec that we put together actually works as we intend, and there aren't any gotchas. Some of the things that we're looking at coming down the road are going to be enhancements around the concept of supply chain. And really the idea is being able to give sort of a better way of viewing the additions and modifications as it comes down the supply chain. What you want to sign, it really is up to a publisher in a lot of cases. And I'll be curious as ads.cert takes off in the industry, if it'll be more like ads.txt, which side is going to be driving it. Well, publishers started first, and then the advertisers now are picking up and only buying inventory that they can validate against ads.txt. So publishers will make the decision as to what they want to sign, and then what kind of a trusted signing provider, quote unquote, will be there for the bid request, and how they'll allow that cert to be communicated, that public key to be communicated out to the buy side. Buyers at the end of the day will make the decision on, okay, I'm only going to ever buy assured inventory. That is inventory that has both ads.txt components and an ads.cert component. The one thing about this, and this is true about ads.txt, is that we are in a real-time world. We're talking about milliseconds of time we want to give, certainly in video for user experience, and certainly even in the concept of live events and video, etc. For the buy side, the idea with certificates, they don't change that frequently. So the buyers want to be able to do things that allow us to say, hey, you know what, I'm going to decide what the resiliency is or the authenticity requirements and constraints I have on each set of inventory I'm looking at buying. Am I going to try and validate and transact and validate every single one? Do I want to validate some? How do I get the certs? How do I cache the certs? How do I keep that up to date? The idea is going to be that our ecosystem, we all have these concepts of daemons and other types of crawlers that live outside and will go and pull information and bring it in to allow it to be efficiently used during the transaction in real time. So basically, buyers are going to need to look at this the same way as we have ads.txt. There's going to be a component that's more of an offline component where you go and crawl and scrape and, oh, I see a signature for the first time for this pub. I don't have that cert yet. Well, I'm going to go ahead and still bid like I normally would, and I'll make sure that my daemon and crawler infrastructures understand that, hey, I've got to go pull this cert, bring it down, and now I can start to validate and make sure that signatures look correct. The public keys will be published and available for crawling at all times, just like in ads.txt. Those files are available at all times. The same will be true for these certs. Next. So the whole idea is that inside of this piece, it really becomes a supply chain through the buy to sell side, or the sell to buy side, excuse me, in that order. So the idea is that a site will authorize the selling of an ad impression. Doesn't matter what kind of ad impression it is. It can be, anything that's supported by OpenRTB. That's video, that's display, that's audio, whatever it might be. And so the idea is that as it goes down through the supply chain to get to the buyer, at the top level, really, the publisher is going to end up signing this request and the key fields of, this is the specific opportunity I have to sell right now. Are you interested? And all the way down through this supply chain, folks can validate and sign and add to themselves and to these signatures as well. Next. So if we have in the middle of this signature, and this is this concept of signing messages and putting envelopes and allowing folks to sign envelopes is tried and true and tested. So the idea could be that if for some reason an ad network or some intermediary tries to falsify the publisher's signature, by the time it gets down to the DSP and the buyer, they have had a secure way to go get what a publisher definitively says, this is my public key for all signatures from my inventory. You can now validate every signature I have given you with this public key. If someone before this bid request gets to a buyer decides to try and falsify or change that signature, the DSP and buyer can actually find out and detect that, oh, wait, this isn't valid, and can throw away that request. Next. I mean, the same thing would be true if an ad network wanted to remove the signature. The buyer is also able to see the same type of thing, that the signature is expected to be there. It's not there. I'm going to go ahead and invalidate this request as well. Next. So this is probably the one that I think will see the most use. I mean, I think that anybody who's trying to be nefarious in this is going to understand that you can't change a signature and you can't throw away a signature. But what happens when folks try to change fields to make them seem better or different to buyers for whatever means of fraud or whatever effect they're trying to make fraudulent? You are unable to change any of the key fields that buyers care about in these OpenRTB requests without the signature not matching. And because the keys, the public keys, are published securely and definitively by the publisher themselves, not the intermediaries, buyers have confidence that when they go to validate this, that, yeah, you know what, this is what the publisher intended, or wait a minute, this isn't what the publisher had indicated when they started this bid request. Our supply chain is complex. And, as it goes down and through, of course, in the vast world, you end up with wrappers upon wrappers. And in OpenRTB, you can end up with folks who are trading these transactions, in milliseconds. And, that's the nature of our industry. And this really does, as.cert gives buyers the ability to know that, okay, when I'm looking at a host name, or I'm looking at a content category, or whatever other types of information, IFAs, that they remain unchanged from the source. And that is the site, the app, whatever it might be. Next.
That was your last slide.
Okay. There you go.
Thank you, Alan. Next, we'll have Ian walk us through some of the problems that the digital advertising world is facing with user experience, and we'll talk about how we can get to a more transparent stage with AdCom. Ian.
Thank you, Jennifer. So yes, one of the major areas we're trying to address with this OpenRTB 3 family is to do with how ads are handled, how creative markup is handled. If you rightly concerned about is the rise in ad blocking. And to be honest, I think in many ways as an industry, we've brought this on ourselves. I mean, today we have ads that are, potentially malicious ads. We have ads that are extremely heavy that slow down the loading of web pages, and all of this gives users a very good reason to want to block ads. As well, there can be unknown elements that are performing tracking that users may not desire. So if there's any hope in stemming this sort of ad blocking epidemic, it's going to require tighter control around these things. And today, particularly with display ad serving, effectively what you're doing with an OpenRTB bid request and bid response is buying the opportunity to inject an arbitrary piece of code into a publisher web page. Ideally, it's an ad, but as we know, it's not necessarily just an ad, and it's not necessarily a good ad that meets good technical standards. And so this handling of ad serving as an arbitrary blob of code is something that needs to change to be able to properly deal with ensuring that there's good user experience, properly ensure that technical standards or requirements are being met, and properly ensure that GDPR compliance is met. Because after all, if the ad is an arbitrary chunk of executable code, ultimately it's nearly impossible to actually be certain that an ad is not doing data collection that is GDPR incompliant. You can scan it every way you can think of, but on a Tuesday at between 8 and 9, when delivered in Southampton, an ad could be doing something that you're not expecting. And so this sort of comes with the territory of these arbitrary payloads. Next slide, please, Jennifer. So with the OpenRTB 3.0 and AdCom 1.0, what we're introducing are new creative payload structures. So first, native is now a full-fledged first-class citizen. There is no separate native spec anymore. It's graduated, grown up, and joined the mainline spec branch. But there's also more explicit support for AMP, and then a concept of a simple image banner. Now, actually all of these, but especially native and simple image banner, offer significant reductions of GDPR risk because they're controlled formats. They're structured payloads that describe the ad that's going to be displayed. Simple image banner, just to be clear here, is just a simple payload of image and link where the rendering of that is controlled by the publisher or the exchange. Additionally, support for trackers, for image impression trackers, for JavaScript impression trackers hasn't gone anywhere. It's just now in its own specific field. So instead of an arbitrary payload that shows an ad and loads in some trackers and things like that, this is being moved into a more structured format where there are separate fields for all of these things, which makes it possible for there to be publisher control over what happens. Now, this is not a requirement. The existing mechanism of arbitrary HTML and JavaScript payload still exists. But the hope is that we can start to move towards these more structured formats for dealing with markup, so to provide all of the benefits that come with it. And so along with this, we now have a standardized ad management API to facilitate creative auditing. Exchanges deal with the approval process for ads in a bunch of different ways today. Either it's pure trust that the DSP is behaving itself, or it's reactive to ads are bid, and then some of the bids are sampled to run through some sort of scanning or human review, but it tends to be reactive. And if you could go to the next slide, please, Jennifer. To really get a control on all of this, we need to have a standardized way for exchanges and DSPs to be able to talk to each other about ads. Jennifer, I think, is this slide perhaps misplaced or landed in the wrong spot here?
Possible. Which slide are you looking for?
The one we're looking at right now is AdCom 1.0 object model. All right, well, we'll go back to that. If you could move on to the next slide, please, Jennifer. Right, so ad management API. So this is a standard API for DSPs to submit ads to exchanges, for exchanges to return approvals to the DSP. Now, for the exchanges that do not use blind trust of the DSP, or that don't do reactive auditing of ads that are bid with, today exchanges are implementing proprietary APIs for ad submission workflows. Most exchanges do not. A couple of major exchanges have such APIs. Now, they very much help with ensuring ad quality in the exchanges, but the problem is they're proprietary. So a DSP has to implement what is effectively conceptually the same, but 3 or 4 or 5 times over, and this creates a lot of friction and overhead that truly isn't necessary if we just standardize this. Now, having a ad management API makes it possible for exchanges to actually provide confidence to publishers that ad specifications are respected, that legal requirements are respected as well. So GDPR is the most clear and pressing example, but other things could be Quebec in Canada here actually has laws about the language in public signage, including advertising. So publishers have a need to make sure that ads are actually in the French language. China has requirements about how ads are labeled to show who is transacting the ads. And having a standardized way to handle approvals makes it much more possible to control this. As well, it makes it possible to transact formats where real-time delivery of a blob of HTML and JavaScript is just not the way it can be. So the best example of that is digital out of home. With digital out of home, or existing implementations of it at least, the image needs to be transmitted into the digital out of home system ahead of time. It's not just a chunk of HTML that the billboard is displaying. And so it's necessary to have this process of submitting ads. And this provides a standardized way to do it. Now, as well, for advertisers, here at Centra, we have a saying about ad quality, which is every minute pending is a minute not spending. And ads that are either not yet approved to bid or are rejected by exchanges, this is a matter that is generally opaque for advertisers today. And so their campaigns may be delayed in being able to launch because the only way an exchange becomes aware of the ad today is because it starts to appear in bid responses. And depending on the exchange, that might trigger an audit that adds delays. Or alternatively, an ad may be denied by an exchange that has an audit process, but it's not possible today, accepting those exchanges that have standardized APIs, it's not possible for the buyer to actually learn this and make the corrections they need to. Instead, spend simply doesn't happen. So with a standardized API, it's now possible for DSPs to tell buyers, your ad is being rejected by this exchange, and here's why. Next slide, please, Jennifer.
I think that's actually our last slide.
Oh, okay. Anyway, that slide about the object model, just one point to make about this. This separation, and if you want to jump back to it, Jennifer, that'd be great. This separation of OpenRTB, the bidding protocol, and AdCom, the domain layer for describing the objects that the bidding layer deals with, allows for a lot more flexibility on things. So let's say tomorrow we as an industry come up with some new way of structuring ad payloads, beyond a simple image banner, rather, let's say, a more structured way of dealing with more rich media type ads. It can be introduced into the AdCom object model, and then that allows it to be used in any of these transactional specifications. It allows it to be used when OpenRTB is used for bidding. It allows it to be used when OpenDirect is used to manage orders. It allows for that update to happen without being blocked by a bunch of huge monolithic specs. So that's one of the primary benefits of that.
Thank you, Ian. So I'll talk a bit about what this beta period means, and then we'll have some questions for Ian and Alan, and then we'll open up to questions for everyone. So we are in the process of taking OpenRTB 3 one step closer towards adoption. Literally a calendar year ago, we published a framework document which kind of described the theory and the expectations and the hopes we had for OpenRTB 3. This beta period is a publication of actual beta specs. There are beta testers who are working towards implementations on all of these various components. So Alan is one of the companies who is beta testing ads.search. Ian is one of the companies, or Centra is one of the companies beta testing the ad management API. We're expecting that will kind kind of prove the ability to implement these specs, as well as assist with transition guidance, as well as kind of prove that there are early adopters. We're also in a public comment period for these specifications. Public comments close, as Tina said, on September 24th. There is work to be done after we receive all comments in order to finalize. And also we want to make sure that there's transition guidance. And we might publish some of that transition guidance right away, and we might publish some of that transition guidance as we are able to actually do the work as a working group. Adoption timeline could look like the following. Hopefully in November, we'll have the specs finalized and ready for adoption. So kind of out of this beta period. We imagine that in Q4, some companies who are closer to the cutting edge might be including OpenRTB3 upgrades or ad management API upgrades into their engineering roadmaps, maybe even some pre-production sprint work. And then in Q1 2019 is really the earliest we'd expect to see a full OpenRTB3 implementation. But definitely going in through the next year, more and more of the adoption is expected. So we'll talk about some use cases. For the sake of time, maybe Ian and Alan, you could pick one of these following questions and kind of give us some of your perspective, and then we'll open up to the entire group to discuss further. So Alan or Ian, maybe which feature are you most excited for, or kind of what use case is most pressing to you, if you can name just one.
Ian, you go ahead first.
Sure. I mean, selfishly, because I was a driver behind this, the ad stuff is something I'm quite excited about, just because we can actually we can actually try and make some things better about how this industry works and eliminate or reduce the risk of problems like malicious ads, auto redirects, things like that. And perhaps even the simple structured payload for basic image ads. Perhaps there's a future in which these sorts of ads are exempted from ad blocking by ad blockers, because one of the reasons ad blockers have stated is heavy ads with animation and things like that. So that's purely speculative on my behalf, but we're creating a structure in which it is possible to provide great user experiences, well controlled, and potentially alleviate the need for ad blocking.
Awesome.
Yeah, I think there's really two things for me that jump out with this change in 3.0, and of course ads.cert is one. I think I go back in a couple Decembers ago, the methbot activity that occurred, and you see some of the schemes that are going on around fraud and just defrauding this entire supply chain is, build a bigger mousetrap, catch a bigger mouse. And I'm pretty excited for ads.cert and ads.txt working in conjunction, because it really does give us a really strong posture for inventory assurance from buy and sell side. And I think it sounds complex when someone first looks at it and goes, oh my God, what do we do? But it really, when it comes to ads.cert, the infrastructure providers and just the infrastructure itself, this is just going to become kind of a commodity posture as we go through. Change is hard, progress is good, and I think that ads.cert in conjunction with ads.txt represents amazing progress for our space, and it's kind of a much larger weapon in our war against fraud in our industry, and it also hopefully will work to simplify some of our fraud detection capabilities, etc. I love the AdCom separation as well, because I think that is going to be finally a wonderful common dialect that can be used across protocols that might be seemingly unrelated. VAST has this concept, a lot of the same concepts of the various objects and types and characteristics. That list can go on and on. So those things are really amazing, use cases and future looking to me. I think that this concept also of syndication, certainly as it comes to video. I think that now we have with ads.cert and some of the changes we made in AdCom and the OpenRTB spec, a real strong way for buyers to validate syndication use cases.
Fantastic. Thank you both. Now let's go ahead and open up the question time to you all, our attendees, and myself, and hopefully Nina from my team can look for your comments that might have come through on chat. So we'll go ahead and open up the question and answer time. So I see one question coming through. Will we be able to access the presentation file? Yeah, well, we record it, and we'll be able to share that with all.
And I just had a quick question as well, and this is just for everyone in the group. I know that the public comment period is open till 24th of September, and some of the questions that I've had are, what kind of parts of the doc is it that you ask for comment on? Is it, obviously it seems quite well thought out, like how, I guess, yeah, what kind of parts is it that you guys look for feedback on?
Alan or Ian, do you want to help answer?
Yeah, I mean, everything is open for feedback. You know, it's good that it's good to hear that people think it's relatively well thought out. That means we've done okay so far, I guess. This isn't the first public comment period, so it's not surprising if there's not a lot left at this point to deal with. But if anybody sees anything about this that they see an error, it doesn't make sense, or you know, they think there's something that should change, that's what public comment is for.
Yeah, and yeah, I just echo that too, which is, you know, we went through, like Ian said, we've had some other comment. You know, we had a group of a bunch of folks who put together the first version, went, oh yeah, this is great, and then you open up to some folks and they go, no, this isn't great, and then we make changes. And I really encourage folks to, you know, let their technical leads take a look at this entire suite, and certainly that object layer model, you know, that layered model that we've taken, and make sure that you know, you can work through at least thinking through, how do you implement this and how would this work? Because, you know, that's really the test for it all, and making sure that we haven't missed anything.
Thanks.
A great question, Tina, thank you. Another question that came through on our Blue Jeans chat, will AdCert be available for mobile? This is a great question. The approach to mobile for ads.cert is closely tied to our work on delivering mobile support for ads.txt. AdCert relies on the ability to post a web resource. And so just like ads.txt, now we have this scenario where a mobile app needs to be correlated to a mobile app needs to be correlated to a URL that the app owns. So we have published, we being the working group has published a document for public comment in June, earlier this summer, outlining a few open areas that we need to work on, as well as a few possible solutions, whether that solution is relying on app stores to help us identify the metadata of an app and a correlated app-owned URL where an ads.txt file or an ads.cert file could be located. Or we could imagine a different scenario where there's kind of a third party who creates this mapping. We are in the process of finalizing that guidance. So within the coming weeks or months, we expect to have more information there. If you're interested, please reach out. But we are very aware that this is a super important area to finalize. Another question that came through, will an ad pod be supported by the whole stack? Previously, the OpenRTB wrapper assumed one item with IAB categories and advertiser domain. Ian or Alan, do you want to take that?
Yeah, I think that even with the current OpenRTB spec, this concept, and it's just not been, I know in the video space, because of video, it grew from an infancy state. We only ever talked about one ad at a time, and OpenRTB has long had this concept of organizing impression objects together, that you could submit all at once to get responses, bids back to support the concept of a pod. And I think that one of the things we need to make sure that we're doing is with 3.0 is really helping give plenty of examples and use cases of how podding can work with OpenRTB and how you approach it, etc. I mean, the support is definitely there in the protocol now, and I think that there can be some mystery around tying the bid request response back to okay, well, how do I get this VAST or VMAP or other payload back to represent that, etc. And I think that maybe Jennifer, it's a good thing for us to as a tech lab post an example of how that all works together. It's a good question.
Yeah, I can also see how it's clear that the OpenRTB spec itself allows there to be a bid request that describes multiple placements available, a bid response that describes bids for one or more of those, and potentially all or nothing. It's all there. I can see how this may not play along perfectly with VAST in its current form. There are areas like this where there's some areas of better alignment needed between specs, and I think that this new sort of approach of looking at a framework of technologies will help us move all of these independent specs together so that they are better aligned with each other.
Fantastic. So we are actually at the hour. I think I see a couple more comments, or maybe just one more comment that came through the Blue Jeans chat, so we can respond to that by email. But I would like to thank you all so much for giving us the time to speak to you all. Hopefully the presentation demystified OpenRTB. If you do have more questions, email the alias openrtb@iabtechlab.com. We can try to get you plugged into the working group, or respond to any questions or any feedback that you have on these specs. Special thanks to Tina and the IAB UK team for suggesting this, and for Ian Trider and Alan Dove for joining us. And that's all that we have time for today. So thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.